Why did the city feel like it was holding its breath? Rain carved silver scars across the Philadelphia skyline, cold and relentless, as if the heavens themselves wanted to wash the streets clean. But nothing could wash away what was about to happen. The convention hall downtown pulsed with light and laughter, where leaders in polished suits shook hands and toasted glasses, oblivious to the storm outside or the one about to erupt above them. 600 meters away, on the roof of a forgotten hotel, a single figure lay prone, invisible against the gravel. Her breathing slowed. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the rain. In her hands, an old rifle whispered promises it should have never kept. Through the optics, distance collapsed into intimacy. The Secretary of Defense, David, smiled as he accepted a handshake, believing himself untouchable. His guards scanned the crowd, but not the skyline, not the shadows, not her. 4 pounds of pressure on the trigger, that's all it ever took. The muted crack was no louder than a door closing, but in that instant Philadelphia broke. The secretary fell mid-greeting, lifeless before his aides understood what had happened. Panic detonated in the hall. Sirens screamed. Radios barked, but the rooftop was already empty. No brass, no shell casing, no trace, only the mark of a ghost. Down below, chaos flooded the streets. Yet far from the scene, silence reigned in a warehouse in Fort Wayne, Alaska. Riley sat at a steel bench, the hum of fluorescent lights above her, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Her hands worked with mechanical precision, disassembling an old M24 sniper rifle. She pulled the bolt free, wiped the grooves, laid each part carefully on a cloth. To anyone passing by, she was nothing more than an armory technician following routine. But her movements were too fluent, too intimate, like choreography etched into her muscles long before this day. The rifle looked like it had been waiting for her. The door opened. Heavy boots echoed against the concrete. Colonel Mason Drake entered, his gaze immediately falling on Riley's hands. He watched as she slid the firing pin back into place, eyes never leaving the weapon. "You stripped that like you were born to it," Drake said, voice low, sandpapered by years of war. Riley didn't look up. "Just routine maintenance, sir, before it's shipped out for decommission." Drake stepped closer, his fingers brushing the rifle stock. He paused at an engraving faintly burned into the wood, a circle of crosshairs with an arc above it, almost invisible, almost. His jaw tightened. Funny thing, that mark belonged to a unit that never officially existed. Riley's hand stilled. "Line," Drake murmured, his eyes locked on hers. "And your old call sign was Shade." Her mask cracked for half a heartbeat. Years of anonymity shattered by 2 words. She forced her face back into stillness. "You've mistaken me, Colonel." But Drake shook his head. Slowly, he reached into his jacket and placed a small, encrypted drive on the bench beside the rifle she had cleaned too well. "There's a chain of assassinations unfolding," he said. "High-value targets. Every shot disguised as an accident, but every one of them screams line. And now," he tapped the rifle, "this surfaces in your hands." Riley's pulse quickened, though her face betrayed nothing. "The latest victim," Drake continued, "was General's rival. Every thread leads back to Aegis Vector Systems, something called Project." He stepped back, his shadow stretching across the floor. "Meeting, 2100, officers' quarters, room 214. Don't waste my time with lies." He left without another word. The rifle remained in her hands, heavier now, almost unbearable. Riley stared at the sigil on the wood, her mark. The name Shade pressed against her ribs like an old scar she thought had healed. 3 years she had buried it. 3 years she had been no one. But ghosts don't stay buried forever. That night her apartment was too quiet. The kind of quiet that made your skin crawl, reminding you of everything you once were and everything you had tried to forget. She checked every lock twice. Then, after a long pause, she slid open the closet door. Behind hanging coats was a keypad. 12 digits entered with muscle memory she hated to admit she still had. A hidden panel slid open. Inside was the life she swore she had abandoned. Foam-lined shelves cradled weapons still sealed in oil, a stack of passports bearing names she didn't answer to anymore, bundles of cash, and at the center, a laptop stored in a waterproof case. She set it down, her fingers trembling just enough to betray her. The drive clicked into the port. Files bloomed across the screen. Ledgers, surveillance stills, orders coded in numbers only people like her could read, and through all of it one shadow repeated. Project. Her eyes stopped on a single image, grainy, captured from distance, blurred by fire and smoke. A figure walking away from a burned-out convoy. Broad shoulders, familiar posture. Her throat tightened. Ward. Her former spotter, dead, or so she had believed. She had saluted his folded flag, watched his name carved into stone. She had carried his ghost for 3 years. But here he was, alive in pixels, alive and tangled in orbit. The room pressed in around her. Her chest heaved once, controlled but sharp. If the file was true, then her past hadn't stayed buried. It had been waiting, watching. She shut the laptop. The echo of the lid closing sounded final, like a door slamming shut. Shade was back in play. The hours crawled until 2100. When she entered room 214, the curtains were drawn, lights dimmed. The air was thick, more interrogation cell than officer housing. Drake sat across from her, a folder spread on the table. Project, he began. His tone was steady, but his eyes betrayed the urgency beneath. Aegis Vector's creation, modeled after line but stripped of restraint. Neural conditioning layered onto skill. They're building shooters who don't question orders, just executioners. Riley said nothing, but every word pierced her like a blade. Drake flipped the folder open, schematics, training footage, budget flows hidden in civilian contracts. They've accelerated the program. Headquarters in Portland. Tomorrow night at the Oregon Convention Center Gala. That's the target window. She was about to answer when the lock clicked behind her. A presence moved through the door without sound. Riley's instincts flared. Her hand went to her weapon, half raised, until a voice stopped her. Izzy Shade. Her heart lurched. Ward stepped into the light. His face was older. A scar cut down one cheek, his eyes unchanged. Her weapon stayed half-raised, hand trembling despite her training. "You're supposed to be dead," she whispered. "Supposed to be," he said softly. Drake leaned back in his chair, watching the reunion like a chess match. Nodded toward him. "We don't have long, cleanup crew is inbound. 2 advance, 4 follow. This meeting, this room, it'll vanish in fire if we stay." The air tightened. Drake snapped the folder shut. "Then we move." The 3 of them exited into the freezing corridor. Outside, an SUV idled, exhaust curling like smoke in the dark. Behind the wheel, Cole, former commander, now a fugitive, his name whispered across blacklists. His eyes narrowed as Riley climbed in. "Didn't think I'd see Shade again," he muttered, shifting the gears. Riley said nothing. Her pulse was a storm. In the rear, checked his weapon, eyes fixed on the mirrors. The convoy behind them had already begun to stir. The SUV lunged forward, tires spraying slush, carving a path into the snowbound road. The world outside blurred into frost and darkness. Every mile pulled Riley deeper into the world she had once tried to erase. And yet beneath the silence, one truth gnawed at her chest. If was alive, then nothing about her past was what she believed. The storm outside howled like an omen, and somewhere between Philadelphia's chaos and Alaska's frozen roads, she knew, the ghost she had tried to kill was alive again. But what did that mean for her? The thought stayed with her as the SUV swallowed the night. Why was he here? That was the only thought in Riley's mind as Ward sat across from her in the dim interior of the SUV, his rifle resting across his knees as if he had never left. She kept her gaze on the storm-lashed trees rushing past the window, but her pulse betrayed her. He was supposed to be dead, buried under a mountain in Hindu Kush. A folded flag, a carved name. She had mourned him in silence, carried him like a ghost through every sleepless night. And yet here he was, alive, and already tangled in a nightmare called. The SUV bucked over frozen ruts, headlights dimmed to slivers against the blizzard. Cole's knuckles gripped the wheel, jaw tight, eyes refusing to meet hers. In the back seat, adjusted his scope, silent as ever, though the scar along his cheek told stories he wasn't offering yet. No one spoke. The silence was louder than gunfire. Finally, Cole broke it. Safe house is 10 minutes out. It's waiting. His voice was gravel, carrying the weight of too many broken allegiances. Riley's fingers tapped once against her knee, an old tic from her line days. She hated that it returned. She forced it still. When they finally pulled off the main road, the SUV dipped into a clearing at the edge of frozen timberland. A squat cabin sat hunched under the weight of snow, its roof sagging like tired shoulders. Antennas bristled from its corners, catching the weak glow of a generator. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with the scent of coffee and burnt circuits. A woman sat hunched over a bank of monitors, headset looped around her neck. Nora, hacker, analyst, once a ghost in the system, now a fugitive in flesh. "You're late," she said, barely looking up as she shoved a tablet into Riley's hands. On the screen, a stream of obituaries scrolled past. Politicians, scientists, defense contractors, each death neatly filed under accident, a plane malfunction, a sudden gas leak, a heart attack in mid-speech. Everyone too clean, too convenient. Riley's lips parted. This is a slaughter disguised as chance. Exactly, Nora replied, tapping through, and every link ties back to the same fingerprints. He's pruning obstacles one by one. What he wants isn't chaos, it's control. Project is his scalpel. Drake leaned against the wall, arms folded. His silence was heavier than his words. When Riley finally lifted her eyes, his stare was steady, sharp. "We stop it in Portland, at the gala, tomorrow night." But's voice cut through, flat as a blade. "Unless we're already compromised." The air froze. Riley turned toward him, her chest tight. He pulled a second file from his jacket, dropping it onto the table. Inside, intercepted chatter, coded signals, patterns too clean to dismiss. "All of this," said, "runs through Colonel Drake's channels. Been one step ahead for months, too precise to be chance. Someone been feeding them, and every breadcrumb leads here." Drake didn't flinch, but his jaw flexed. "If I were their leak ward, you'd already be a corpse, think." He reached into his pocket and laid down a folded photograph. A woman's face, younger, her eyes strikingly similar to Cole. Drake said, "'S daughter, she's alive, is holding her at Hillsborough. That's why's been silent all this time." Riley's eyes flicked to Cole. His grip on the table turned white-knuckled. His face hardened, but the truth was written in the cracks of his silence. Betrayal lingered in the air, thick and choking. Suspicion, Drake's claim, Cole's silence. Riley felt the tension coil like wire around her chest. No one here was clean. No one here was whole. Before another word could cut deeper, an alarm wailed across the safe house. Red strobes bathed the room in pulses of blood. "Convoy inbound," Nora snapped, ripping cables free from her monitors. "Federal pool vehicles, not random." Cole grabbed rifles, tossing one to Riley and one too. "We don't win this fight here." Drake's voice cut through the chaos. "Back exit, move." The group plunged into the snow, boots hammering the frozen earth. Headlights carved through the trees, engines roaring closer. Silencers spat white plumes. Bark exploded around them. Riley returned fire in bursts, her rounds splitting shadows, forcing men to scatter. His knife flashed in the dark, his strikes silent and efficient. Cole led them deeper into the tree line, every step a gamble against the narrowing circle of pursuers. A second SUV waited under camouflage netting, its engine already warm. They piled in. Cole floored it, wheels tearing through slush. The convoy followed, beams slicing between the pines. "Routes west are burned," Nora hissed from the back, tablet glowing against her face. "We swing south, Portland, only chance left." Riley braced against the window, her breath fogging the glass. Behind them, lights flickered, fading into distance, but she knew they weren't gone. Not really. No one chased a ghost without becoming one themselves. The SUV carried them through the storm, silence broken only by shallow breaths and the growl of the engine. Riley leaned her head back, eyes closing for a moment. Inside, the weight pressed harder. Alive, Drake accused, Cole compromised by blood, and her own name, Shade, dragged out of the grave she had dug for it. For the first time in years, she felt the past clawing at her throat. She forced her eyes open, forced herself to breathe. Tomorrow meant Portland, the gala, the place where would step from shadow into power. If they failed, it wouldn't just be generals or rivals who vanished. It would be nations, chains of command, the very order that held the fragile world together. And Shade would have no choice but to kill again. Outside, the storm swallowed the road. Inside, no one dared speak. Why did the lights feel so bright? The Oregon Convention Center glowed like a jewel against the Portland skyline, glass and steel rising above the river. Inside, chandeliers burned with golden fire, washing over polished marble and polished lies. The defense gala had begun. Politicians, executives, military brass, they mingled with champagne flutes in hand, laughing too easily, shaking hands too firmly, their eyes darting to every corner as if power itself might slip through their fingers if they didn't hold it tight enough. Riley entered as someone else. A badge clipped to her dress identified her as Riley Hart, a mid-level representative of Axiom Defense Systems. Her black dress cut low enough to blend, sharp enough to deflect questions. She moved through the crowd like smoke, measured steps, a polite smile, the face of a woman who belonged. But underneath, every muscle was coiled, every nerve alive. The earpiece in her right ear hummed softly. Cole's voice came through, steady but low. "You're clean, keep moving." Up above, he was positioned in an unfinished tower across the street, his rifle scope sweeping over doors, balconies, rooftops. Overwatch. Old habits returned to him like ghosts. Miles away, in a trailer wired with satellite uplinks, Nora watched through screens, her voice sharp in Riley's other ear. "Audio sweeps live. I'll ghost your trail. If anyone tags you, I'll see it before they do." Riley nodded once, sipping from her glass as if she were just another guest. She let the bubbles cut across her tongue, but her eyes never left the reflection in the polished surfaces. Men in suits, women in gowns, too many smiles, too many angles. Then a shadow brushed past her shoulder. Colonel Mason Drake. He looked older under ballroom light, his tie loosened, glass in hand like any guest. But when his fingers slipped a small packet into her clutch, his whisper was sharp as glass. "Evidence," he said. "Cole's compromised, playing both sides for his daughter's life." Riley didn't stop walking, didn't look at him. Her face never broke, but inside her bag the packet felt heavy enough to drag her down. Cole's voice crackled in her ear again, calm but clipped. "North Corridor, VIP reroute. It's moving." The deputy secretary was tonight's prized target. He had been scheduled for the East Wing stage, but at the last second, security diverted him toward the North Corridor. Nora's voice spiked through the comms. "That's a funnel. 4 exits, 3 already sealed. Classic kill box." Riley's pulse surged. She abandoned her champagne glass, heels striking marble. The corridor stretched ahead, dim lights casting long shadows. Walked with 2 aides, oblivious to the jaws closing around him. Behind them, men in suits moved with a precision no ordinary security carried. Too clean, too timed. "Contact," Riley whispered. She broke into a sprint. One guard reached into his jacket. Riley's elbow drove into his ribs before his weapon cleared leather. She twisted it free, snapped 2 shots downrange. Another man dropped. "Move," she barked, shoving him toward a stairwell door. Her spat controlled fire, each round deliberate, each movement automatic, Shade's movements. Cole's voice cut through the comms. "On your roof line, get him up." Riley kicked the stairwell door open, dragging up the metal steps slick with condensation. Muzzle flashed behind her, stuttered light and shadow. The rooftop opened to wind and sky. A helicopter swung low, rotors beating thunder against the skyline. Its hull bore media logos, too polished, too perfectly timed to be real news. Cole's voice sharpened. "Ride's hours, move." They hustled across the gravel. Riley shoved into the cabin, ducking under the spray of rotor wash. Cole appeared from the shadows, weapons slung, calm despite the chaos. Below, the convention center sealed like a trap. Men moved in silence, radios buzzing, doors locking. General himself entered the atrium, coat drawn tight against the rain. He didn't chase. He didn't raise a weapon. He simply looked up, his gaze locking with Riley's as the helicopter lifted. He didn't blink, didn't speak, just watched as they rose into the mist. The city shrank beneath them. Riley's chest heaved from exertion, but her thoughts raced faster than her breath. Was alive, for now, but had made no move to stop them. No pursuit, no bullets, just a silent calculation written across his face. "Why let us go?" she muttered under her breath. No one answered. Minutes later, static swallowed Drake's signal. His frequency cut out, vanished. Cole sat across from her in the cabin, his eyes hard, his daughter's name still etched on his silence. Sat hunched, shaken but alive, his knuckles white on the seat. Leaned against the hatch, scanning the horizon like the old days. But the scar on his cheek reminded her, these were not the old days. Nothing was. Nora's voice filled the line again. "Gale is burned. Next vector is Hillsborough, Aegis Vector's facility. They're holding there. If we don't move now, she's gone." Cole's jaw tightened, the sound of his teeth grinding audible even over the rotor wash. Riley caught his eye. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. He gave a single nod. Then Hillsborough. Rain followed them all the way down. The helicopter touched down short of the facility, blades chopping the night. They moved under cover of the storm, silhouettes against the forest, boots crunching gravel as they closed on Aegis Vector's perimeter. Floodlights glared across the compound. Towers swept arcs of white through the rain. Patrols moved in careful rotation, each guard walking the same pattern. Riley's breath fogged as she threaded her silencer onto the... Her heartbeat slowed again, the way it always did when Shade took over. She moved first. A guard rounded the corner, step steady, posture relaxed. Riley slipped behind him, arms snaking around his throat, a short choke. His body folded silently into the mud. She lowered him without sound. Knife caught another, quick and precise. Cole covered the rear, rifle tucked tight, eyes never leaving the shadows. Nora's whisper in their ears, "Thermals offline, 30 seconds, move now." They slipped through a service door. Inside, the air was cold, metallic, heavy with the hum of servers. Red lights pulsed overhead. Cameras swept in slow arcs. Riley counted paces. Each turn rehearsed in Nora's feed. Down one corridor, past 2 intersections, through a reinforced door. At the end, behind glass, sat Cole, shackled to a chair, eyes hollow but alive. Cole's breath hitched over comms. "I see her." A guard stepped into the hall. Riley fired once. Silencer barked. He fell, key card clattering across the tile, scooped it, swiping the lock. The door clicked open. Collapsed into her father's arms. No words, no questions. Just the weight of survival pressing into his chest. Then alarms. Metallic wails ripped through the corridors. Red strobes drowned vision. Steel doors slammed. "Extraction route Delta," Nora snapped. "Loading bay, move." They sprinted. Footsteps pounded behind them. Riley fired in bursts, clearing arcs, forcing enemies back. Lobda, the corridor washed white. Cole shielded with his body, dragging her through the smoke. The loading bay opened in chaos. Rain sheeted across concrete. Headlights converged. SUVs rolled into place. And in the storm stood General. Trench coat whipping, face calm, eyes fixed on Riley. He didn't speak, didn't raise a weapon. He only watched. For one heartbeat, time froze. Then Riley shoved forward, firing as they sprinted through a gap in the fence. And vehicle roared to life, tires screamed, mud sprayed. As they pulled away, Riley looked back once. Through the curtain of rain, she saw two figures, unmoving, and beside him, just visible in the floodlights, Mason Drake. For a fraction of a second, he shifted his body, just enough to block's line of sight. And that was the half-second they needed to escape. The SUV tore into the storm. Inside, silence fell. Shook in her father's arms, wiped blood from his cheek, expression unreadable. Nora's voice trembled over comms. "They let you go, again." Riley sat soaked in the back seat, the rifle across her lap, her breath shallow. She didn't know if Drake had just saved them, or staged the entire thing. And in her chest, the question burned hotter than the storm outside. What side was she really on? Why was the building so quiet? Beaverton's industrial district slept under steady rain, the streets glistening like oil. Most windows were dark. Only one structure hummed with hidden life, Aegis Vector's server hub, a squat fortress of glass and steel behind fences slick with floodlight glare. Riley crouched in the shadows of a rail spur, water dripping from her hood, eyes fixed on the compound. Knelt beside her, night vision flickering green across his face. Cole crouched at their flank, his hand tightening on his rifle as if each squeeze could bring his daughter closer to safety, though she already sat waiting in the they had left behind. "Thermal grid rotates every 90 seconds, Nora whispered through their comms. She was miles away, her face lit by monitors, her voice taut with concentration. "Window opens in 3, 2, go." They sprinted low, water splashing under their boots, cutting across asphalt toward the fence. Clipped the wire, curling it back with practiced ease. One by one they slid through, shadows slipping inside. The building's chill struck them immediately. The server floor stretched like a canyon of machines, towering racks humming, green and red lights blinking in endless rows. Cold air pumped through vents, misting in the condensation of their breath. Riley's pulse slowed, her step softened. This was the rhythm she knew, the silence before something broke. "Left aisle, fourth bay," Nora guided. "Console access there, slot the drive." Riley moved, weaving between racks, her tight in her grip. Each second dragged, stretched by the thought of what they were about to uncover. Project, the shadow in every file, the ghost behind every assassination. She reached the console, slid the encrypted drive into the port. Lines of code erupted across the screen, budgets, orders, surveillance footage, rosters of names. Her chest tightened as she scrolled. This wasn't theory. This wasn't paranoia. It was a ledger of murder written in contracts. Training, accidents documented as performance tests. Civilian casualties marked as acceptable losses. Lists of targets not yet dead but already erased on paper. Leaned closer, eyes hard. "This is genocide engineered." Cole's voice was lower, rougher. "It's proof, enough to burn them." Then, a crash of steel. The sound tore through the silence like a blade. Security breached. Armored men poured into the aisle, masks down, rifles up. Gunfire ripped sparks from the server racks, suppressed cracks snapping in bursts. "Contact," shouted, dropping low, returning fire in short, brutal bursts. Riley rolled behind a tower, muzzle flashing as she stitched shadows red. Cole barked orders across the floor, his voice that of the commander he once was. "South Bay doors, move now." They fought through the aisles, sparks spraying, bullets ricocheting. Riley vaulted over a toppled server cart, dragging her shoulder against the cold steel as rounds split the air around her. Her breath came sharp, focused. Cleared their flank, knife flashing once, blood misting against the floor tiles. Riley fired to cover him, her rounds measured, deliberate. Every shot the echo of Shade's old life. The South Bay doors loomed ahead, half open, rain slicing through the gap. But outside, SUV headlights speared the storm. Engines idled like waiting beasts. And there, standing bareheaded in the downpour, trench coat plastered to his frame, General. He didn't flinch at the alarms, didn't order fire, didn't raise his hand. He simply stood, watching. Riley froze for half a breath, his eyes locked on hers through the storm, unblinking, calm. The team hesitated, their exit path framed by his stillness. For one suspended moment, no one fired. No pursuit came, only the rain between them. Then turned away, raised one hand. The SUV stayed idle. They were allowed to vanish into the storm. Not mercy, calculation. The vehicle fishtailed across wet asphalt until distance swallowed the compound. Inside, the team exhaled, relief colliding with unease. Nora's voice trembled as she confirmed the upload. Transmission going out now. Receiving. He'll have it in his hands within minutes. Riley sat against the window, soaked and shaking, but her mind burned with the same question. Why? Why let them go? Twice. Cole pulled closer when they reunited his arms crushing around her like the years hadn't existed. She buried her face in his chest, silent sobs shaking through her frame. For him, it was enough. For now. But Riley's eyes drifted elsewhere. To who watched her with something between guilt and loyalty. To Drake, absent, vanished after Portland, his frequency silent. And to herself, Shade, the ghost who killed with precision but lived with silence. She thought of the faces in the files, the names already struck from the ledger. She thought of standing still, rain painting his face like war paint. He wasn't losing. He wasn't afraid. He was calculating. And that terrified her more than the bullets had. Later that night, in the silence of the Riley lay awake. Rain tapped against the roof, steady as a metronome. She stared at the ceiling, replaying every second of the server floor, every face, every choice. She tried to picture her life 3 years ago, before Shade had died, before she buried herself in anonymity. She remembered's laugh back then, his voice giving orders, Drake's promises of missions that would never be remembered. She remembered the pride, the belonging, the illusion of control. Now it all felt like sand slipping through her fingers. Her eyes closed, the weight didn't fade. She was back in the game, but this time she wasn't sure who she was fighting for or against. Sometimes silence was survival, but tonight silence felt like surrender. And Shade had never surrendered. Why didn't it feel like a victory? Hours after the firefight in Beaverton, the hummed with the weak glow of monitors and the low buzz of generators. The team should have been celebrating. They had the proof, every contract, every covert assassination order, every face tied back to project. The data had been transmitted to Washington, into the hands of Deputy Secretary himself. And yet the silence in the room was heavier than the storm outside. Nora sat rigid at her console, her fingers trembling as they danced across the keys. She spoke into her headset, her voice strained but determined. Secure channel stabilizing. Stand by. The screens flickered, then resolved into his face. His voice came clipped but decisive. I have the packet. Confirm authenticity. Nora swallowed, her eyes never leaving the code streaming across her screens. Confirmed. Every detail cross-checks with existing intelligence. Funding, its targets, its chain of command, all of it ties directly to General. A silence followed. The only sound was the scratch of a pen. Then's voice hardened. Under Title 50 authority, I am activating Operation Lantern. General and his network are to be neutralized with immediate effect. The words hung in the room like smoke. Cole exhaled sharply, pulling his daughter closer, relief and fear mingling in his grip. Leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, face unreadable. Nora sagged in her chair, exhaustion stealing the fight from her shoulders. And Riley just sat still, watching, listening. Operation Lantern. The phrase sounded decisive, military, clean, but she knew what it meant in practice. Shadow teams unleashed, deniable assets activated, blood spilled in silence with no accountability. It wasn't victory, it was escalation. The transmission ended, the monitors went black. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the hum of the generator filled the silence. Then Cole finally whispered, "My daughter's safe. That's all that matters." His hand tightened on shoulder, his jaw trembling just enough to betray the cost of those words. But Riley's eyes lingered on him. She thought of the packet Drake had slipped into her clutch at the gala, the one she still hadn't opened. The weight of it in her bag felt heavier with each passing hour. Was Cole really compromised? Had he been feeding both sides, forced by the noose around his daughter's throat? Or had Drake planted that seed to fracture them from the inside? And why twice now had let them walk away? Her chest tightened with the question, but she said nothing. His voice finally cut the silence. Orders on paper don't win wars in shadows. He stepped away from the wall, checking the magazine of his rifle. "Isn't finished. And Drake," he trailed off, shaking his head, "we still don't know where he stands." The name lingered like a ghost in the room. Drake, the colonel who had dragged Riley back into the game, the man who had spoken her call sign out loud after 3 years of silence. Ally, traitor, or something worse. Shifted in her chair, her eyes still hollow but alive. She looked at her father, then at Riley, then away again. There was something in her gaze, something fragile, something Riley recognized. The look of someone who had survived captivity, only to wonder if survival itself was a sentence. Later that night, Riley stepped outside. The rain had softened into mist, the forest shrouded in gray. She leaned against the railing of the porch, the M24 resting across her lap. She hadn't meant to bring it with her, but it felt fused to her hands now, as if she couldn't leave it behind even if she tried. Joined her after a while. He said nothing at first, just stood beside her, both of them staring into the fog. Finally, Riley broke the silence. "I buried you." His jaw tightened. "I know. I folded your flag. I saluted your name." "I know," he repeated, softer this time. She turned to face him, her voice breaking despite herself. "And all this time you were alive, working in this, with them." His eyes met hers, Scar catching the faint porch light. "I didn't have a choice." There it was, the phrase she hated most. The phrase she had told herself every time she pulled a trigger, every time she walked away from another body, another secret grave. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You always have a choice. You chose to disappear. You chose to leave me with your ghost." Didn't argue. He just stood there, his silence heavier than her anger. She wanted to scream at him, hit him, anything to break the stillness between them. But instead, she sat back down, her hands tightening on the rifle across her knees. The storm didn't answer. Morning came gray and thin. They regrouped inside, maps spread across the table, Nora's monitors blinking with intercepted chatter. Operation Lantern was already in motion. Multiple task forces had been activated, but Riley knew better than to believe in clean resolutions. "We'll vanish before they reach him," Nora said, her voice tired but sharp. "He's too calculated. He's already seen Lantern coming." Cole rubbed his temples, his daughter asleep against his side. "Then what's left?" Riley looked at the map, at the marked locations, at the web of red lines connecting names and places. Every thread still led back to the same man. "It's not hiding," she said quietly. "He's waiting. He's been 2 steps ahead from the beginning, We've been playing the game he wanted us to play. His eyes flicked to hers. And you think he'll keep letting us walk? Riley didn't answer. Because she didn't know. What she did know was this. Every choice they had made so far, every firefight survived, every narrow escape, none of it had closed the distance. None of it had changed the fact that Shade was back in play. And the ghosts of her past weren't done with her yet. She excused herself, retreating to the narrow room that served as her quarters. She closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally pulled the packet from her bag. Her fingers hesitated on the seal. If she opened it, there would be no going back. The truth, whatever it was, would change everything. She thought of Cole's arms around his daughter, of Scar in silence, of Drake's voice whispering her old call sign. She tore the packet open. Inside was a drive, small, unmarked. Her chest tightened. With trembling hands, she slid it into her laptop. The screen came alive, files unfolded, images, transcripts. And at the center, one video. She clicked play. The footage was grainy, captured by surveillance. A room, a table, seated at it Cole, his face tight, his shoulders hunched. Across from him, men she didn't recognize but whose uniforms bore his insignia. Cole slid a folder across the table. One of the men opened it, nodded, then slid a photo back. A photo of Riley. Riley's chest clenched. The audio was faint, distorted, but one sentence cut through clear. "She's your problem now." The video froze. Riley stared at the screen, her breath caught in her throat. Her mind reeled, every nerve on fire. Cole selling her out. Or forced to. The room spun. She slammed the laptop shut, her hands shaking. Her reflection in the dark screen stared back at her, not Riley, the invisible armory tech, but Shade, the ghost who had trusted once and paid for it with blood. She felt the old silence return, wrapping around her like a shroud. And she knew then, trust was the first casualty. What do you do when trust dies? Riley sat alone in the dim room, the laptop shut but still burning in her lap. The grainy footage replayed in her head again and again, Cole sliding the folder across the table, her photo coming back. "She's your problem now." The words carved themselves into her skull, sharper than bullets. Outside her door, the murmured with faint voices, Nora's low hum over comms, steady rhythm of cleaning his weapon, Cole's softer tone as he soothed his daughter back to uneasy sleep. To anyone else, it sounded like survival. To Riley, it sounded like lies. She rose. The M24 hung in her grip like an old sin. She pushed the door open. The others looked up, each instinctively aware that something had shifted. Cole straightened, hand still on his daughter's shoulder. "What is it?" Riley set the rifle against the wall, her eyes locked on him. "We need to talk, outside." The weight in her voice left no room for argument. They stepped onto the porch. The night was thick with fog, the trees towering like silent witnesses. Cole leaned against the railing, crossing his arms, his jaw flexed as if bracing for impact. "Say it," he muttered. Riley didn't hesitate. "I saw the footage. You sitting across from men, passing them files, my face in their hands, your voice saying she's your problem now." Cole's eyes closed. For a long moment he said nothing. The silence stretched, filled only by the drip of rain off the roof. Finally he opened them again. His gaze wasn't defensive, it was tired. They had. Riley's chest tightened. "They sent me proof," he continued, his voice low, rough. "Photos, recordings, her screams. They said if I didn't give them something, anything, she'd vanish into a hole I'd never pull her from. So yes, I passed them files. Nothing critical, scraps to keep them satisfied. And when they asked about you," he stopped, shaking his head. "I told myself it would throw them off. That maybe if they hunted a ghost, they'd stop circling her." Riley's throat burned. "So you sold me out." His stare locked on hers. "I saved my daughter." The words cut, but not because they were cruel, because they were honest. For a moment, Riley saw her own reflection in him, the choices she had made, the people she had abandoned, the names carved into her conscience. She wanted to hate him, to raise the rifle and erase the betrayal, but deep inside she knew, in his place she might have done the same. Her voice came out hollow, and how many more people pay the price for that choice? Cole didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. Behind them the door creaked open. Stepped out, weapons slung casually but his eyes sharp. "We're wasting time. Lantern's already moving. Isn't waiting for us to sort out our guilt." Riley turned, her pulse still ragged. "And where do you stand in this? Alive after 3 years, working inside. Don't tell me you didn't make compromises too." Scar twitched with the faintest smile. "Of course I did. The difference is I made them so we'd have a chance to fight back." His voice dropped, steady but weighted. "Shade, you think you've been hiding, but's known about you all along. He let you live because you were more useful alive than dead. A ghost to spook the system, a weapon waiting to be pulled back into play." Her chest hollowed at the words. "You think you came back on your terms," continued. "You didn't. You're already inside his game." Riley's fists clenched. The fog pressed closer, the night colder. From the doorway, Nora's voice cut through. "Then maybe it's time we stop playing by his rules." She held a tablet, its screen glowing with shifting code. "Lantern orders are already leaking, has eyes everywhere, but I've traced something else, secure traffic running parallel. Not his, not Lantern's, Drake." The name dropped like a stone in water. Riley's breath caught, Cole's head lifted, eyes narrowed. Nora stepped closer, screen tilted toward them. "He's alive, off-grid but transmitting, encrypted as hell but it's him, and whatever side he's on, he's still moving pieces." Riley stared at the flickering coordinates, her chest tightening. Drake, the man who dragged her back, who spoke Shade's name aloud, who left them in the gala only to reappear in the storm beside. If Cole was betrayal and was compromise, then Drake was the question mark that could shatter everything. Her voice came steady, colder than she felt. "Where?" "East," Nora said. "Redmond, industrial yards not far. If we move now, we can intercept before people close in." His hand tightened on his rifle. Cole looked at his daughter through the window, his face torn. Riley knew the fractures were only deepening, but waiting meant letting the storm swallow them whole. She grabbed the M24 from the wall, slinging it over her shoulder. Her voice was flat, decisive. "We move." The drive east was silent. The SUV carved through misted highways, headlights cutting tunnels in the fog. Riley sat in the passenger seat, eyes fixed forward. Drove, his grip firm but relaxed. Cole rode in the back, his daughter asleep against his shoulder, his silence heavy as stone. Nora's tablet glowed faintly beside her, fingers tapping code even as the road blurred by. Every few miles, Riley's gaze drifted to the mirror, to Scar, to Cole's hollow eyes, to the girl sleeping through a world of shadows. She wondered if any of them would make it through this. The industrial yard in Redmond was a skeleton of steel and rust. Abandoned warehouses, broken cranes, puddles reflecting fractured light. The SUV rolled to a stop in silence, engines cut. They moved on foot, boots crunching against gravel. The air smelled of oil and rain. Nora's voice came through the comms, hushed but urgent. "Signal strong, 200 meters ahead, inside the main warehouse." They spread out. Riley took point at her flank, Cole covering the rear. The door creaked as they slid inside, weapons raised. The interior was a cavern of shadows. Rusted scaffolds, stacks of shipping containers, echoes of dripping water. And there, sitting on a crate under a hanging bulb, was Colonel Mason Drake. Alive, calm, waiting. His eyes lifted as they entered. His voice was steady, even warm. "Took you long enough." The silence that followed was heavier than any firefight. Riley's hands tightened on the rifle, Cole's jaw locked. Stance shifted, caught between trust and fire. Drake just smiled faintly. the kind of smile that could mean salvation or damnation. "Shade," he said, his tone almost nostalgic. "You were never supposed to come back, and yet here you are, which means it's time you finally learn what this is really about." Why did his voice sound so calm? Colonel Mason Drake sat under the single bulb, shadows slicing across his face. Around him, the warehouse smelled of rust and damp concrete. Riley's rifle was raised, her heartbeat steady but sharp, flanked her, weapon at the low ready. Cole lingered near the entrance, torn between keeping his rifle leveled and shielding his daughter waiting in the SUV. Nora hovered at the edge, tablet clutched like a lifeline, her eyes darting between Drake and the code still scrolling across her screen. "You think's the storm," Drake said quietly, "but you don't see the tide beneath him. You never did." Riley's jaw tightened. "Then tell me what I've been dying to know since you dragged me back. Which side are you on?" Drake's faint smile never wavered. "I'm on the side that keeps the lights on while the rest of you sleep. Always have been." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice dropping. "Isn't running, he's fronting it. He's the face on the chessboard, the piece you're meant to chase. The real players, they're sitting in boardrooms with contracts signed in ink and blood. Aegis Vector was never his. It was theirs. He just wears the mask." Nora's voice trembled as she spoke. "You're saying he's a puppet." "A willing one," Drake corrected. "He enjoys the power, but when he falls, another will take his place. Lantern won't solve this. It'll just kill one man while the machine keeps grinding." Scar caught the light as he scowled. "Then why feed us just enough to get here? Why let us bleed through his traps?" Drake's gaze shifted to him. "Because Shade needed to remember who she is. And you," his eyes lingered on, "you needed to stop pretending you, cut yourself free." Riley's pulse spiked at her call sign. She hated how it still carried weight, how it still pulled at her bones like gravity. "You used me," she said flatly. Drake didn't deny it. "I woke you, because the ghosts are the only ones the machine still fears." Cole finally spoke, his voice low, shaking with contained fury. "My daughter was chained in their basement. Don't talk to me about ghosts. Talk to me about leverage." Drake's eyes softened for the briefest moment. "And now she's free, because I made sure the thread stayed loose enough for you to pull her out." Cole's hand tightened on his rifle. "If you knew." Drake raised a palm. "Don't confuse knowing with controlling. They had her. They forced your hand. That was their game, not mine." Riley cut in, voice like ice. "So what is your game?" Drake leaned back, the bulb swaying faintly above him. "My game is survival, not yours, not mine, humanity's. You've seen the files, Shade. You know what is training killers who obey without hesitation, soldiers who don't question. Governments will call them peacekeepers. Corporations will call them assets. And once they're everywhere, no one will call them human." The words settled heavy. Riley remembered the footage. The contracts disguised as civilian projects. The lists of names crossed out in neat, bureaucratic lines. Drake's voice softened. "You know what happens when obedience replaces conscience. Dignity dies, entirely, and then nothing separates us from the weapons we hold." For a heartbeat, silence, even looked away. Then the distant sound of engines broke it. Nora's tablet chirped red, movement, multiple vehicles converging fast. Her eyes shot to Drake. "Yours." Drake's expression didn't flicker. "Not mine." Moved to the window, scanning the rain-slick streets. "It's him." His voice was flat, certain. Cole cursed under his breath, dragging a fresh magazine from his vest. "We don't have the numbers for this fight." Drake rose slowly from the crate, his silhouette stretching in the bulb's glow. "Then don't fight his army, fight the machine behind him." He stepped closer, his tone sharp but urgent. "He's here for me. I'm the thread he needs to cut. Use that. While he's focused on me, you slip through and take what really matters, the server in Salem. It's not just contracts. It's the backbone, the program itself." Riley's rifle stayed trained on him, though her hands ached with the weight. "Why should we believe a single word you say?" Drake stopped just out of reach. His eyes met hers, calm, steady, unbearably certain. Because whether you believe me or not, the storm is already at the door. And because deep down, Shade, you know the truth, you don't get to walk away. You never did. The engines outside roared closer. Tires splashed against flooded asphalt. Turned sharply, we're out of time. Nora hissed, convoy circling, 15, maybe 20 hostiles. Cole shifted toward the door, his face pale under the weight of choice. If we run, we leave him. If we stay, we die here. Riley's finger tightened on the trigger. The image of Cole's betrayal still burned in her skull, but Drake's words gnawed deeper. Not just the machine. She swallowed hard. Then we make a third choice. His eyes flicked to hers. Meaning. She exhaled, steadying herself. Meaning we let them take the bait. The first shots cracked through the warehouse windows, glass exploding inward. Shadows swarmed the yard, silhouettes moving with military precision. Men poured in, rifles flashing under suppressed bursts. Drake stood tall in the chaos, his voice steady. Go, Salem, ended at the source. Cole snarled, but his daughter's face flickered in his mind. Riley saw it in his hesitation. He grabbed Nora's arm, pulling her toward the rear exit, moved with them, firing sharp bursts to cover their retreat. Riley lingered, her rifle still leveled at Drake. He didn't move, didn't beg, only met her eyes with a finality she couldn't shake. Go, Shade, don't waste the seconds I'm giving you. For the briefest instant, she thought she saw something almost human in him, regret or maybe resignation. Then the warehouse erupted in gunfire. Riley turned and ran. The SUV tore through rain-slick streets, the storm swallowing them whole. Drove, jaw set, eyes hard. Nora hunched over her tablet, fingers frantic as she triangulated the Salem server hub. Cole sat rigid, clinging to his arm, her wide eyes silent questions no one could answer. Riley sat in the back, soaked, breath ragged, heart a storm of its own. She replayed the last look Drake had given her. The calm, the certainty, the inevitability. She hated him for it. She hated herself for not pulling the trigger. Broke the silence. If Drake's wrong, Salem's a trap. Riley's gaze stayed on the rain racing down the window. And if he's right, it's the only chance we've got. Cole spoke finally, his voice a low growl. And what if both are true? No one answered. Outside, the storm raged louder, as if the sky itself knew what was coming. And Riley, Shade, sat in the shadows of the back seat, torn between every ghost she carried, every betrayal she had endured, and the machine she was about to face. She wondered if there would be anything left of her when it was over. Why did the road feel endless? The SUV cut through the storm, tires hissing against flooded asphalt. The headlights painted tunnels of pale light into the rain, but Salem felt no closer. Inside, silence weighed heavier than the thunder outside. Slept fitfully against her father's arm. Cole stared ahead, face carved with exhaustion and guilt. Drove, his scar catching stray flashes of lightning, his jaw tight. Nora's tablet glowed faint in the back, her eyes burning as lines of code scrolled. Riley sat apart, her hands on the M24, her chest hollow. Every mile was a question. Every breath carried ghosts. Finally, Nora spoke. We're close. Vector's Salem hub is disguised as a logistics facility. Perimeter is lighter than Beaverton, but inside it's a hive. Automated defenses, biometric locks. If Drake's right, this is the backbone, the place where lives. His eyes stayed on the road. And if he's wrong, we're driving straight into a coffin. Riley didn't answer. She only watched the rain. When they reached the outskirts, the facility rose from the dark like a bunker carved into the earth. Concrete walls, fences glistening with water, towers that blinked red against the storm. Trucks sat idle in the lot, their logos bland and unremarkable, masks for what slept inside. The SUV rolled to a stop in the tree line. Engines cut. Cole checked his weapon, his hands trembling despite his soldier's steadiness. He glanced at his daughter. "You stay here, no matter what." Lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. She only nodded, her eyes wet, her grip tightening on his sleeve. Nora hunched over her tablet. Window tight. Thermal sweeps rotate every minute. Cameras cycle every 20. We move now. They slipped through the rain, cutting the fence low, shadows against the floodlit yard. Riley led, silencer threaded, her body moving with the muscle memory she once swore she'd never use again. Covered her flank, Cole at the rear, Nora a pale glow of screen light between them. Inside, the air was cold, humming. The server floor stretched wider than Beaverton, endless towers blinking in sequence like a heartbeat. Nora slid to a console, fingers moving fast. Slot the drive, pull everything, shut them down if I can. Riley stood guard, her rifle steady, eyes scanning the shadows. But her heart beat uneven. Every hum of the servers felt alive, watching, listening. Knelt beside her, voice low. "When this is done, if it gets done, what then?" She didn't look at him. "Then we carry it. And if we don't make it out." She finally met his eyes, familiar, haunted. "Then we die with it." Before he could answer, the alarms erupted. A metallic howl split the floor. Red strobes bled across the towers. Doors slammed. Nora hissed, "They're here, moving fast." Figures spilled from the shadows, black-armored, rifles raised, visors glowing faintly. But it wasn't just soldiers. Their movements were too sharp, too uniform, too exact. Riley froze for a heartbeat. These weren't ordinary men. These were products. The shooters Drake had warned of. Soldiers trained past humanity into obedience. They moved like shadows, firing in perfect sequence. Bullets sparked off steel, carving the air. "Cover," Cole barked, dragging Nora behind a rack. Riley returned fire, her rounds deliberate, measured. But they didn't flinch, didn't shout, didn't hesitate, just advanced, mechanical in precision. Snarled, firing in controlled bursts, knife flashing when one closed in. Blood sprayed, but the man fell silent, his face blank even in death. Nora screamed over the gunfire. "Files are pulling, just a few more seconds." Riley reloaded, her breath ragged. Every shot felt like striking stone. She ducked behind cover, her hands trembling, her mind burning with the thought, is this what we're fighting to stop? Or is this already too late? Cole's voice cracked as he fired. "They're not soldiers, they're machines in flesh." Nora shouted again, "Got it, pulling the core now." Riley's eyes locked on the mainframe across the floor, a massive server pulsing with red light. It looked alive, breathing through wires and vents. The backbone, the program itself. Her breath caught. "This is it," she whispered. She slung the M24 forward, steadied her breath, and squeezed. The round punched through the core. Sparks erupted. The hum turned into a scream. Lights cascaded red, systems dying row by row. The soldiers froze mid-stride, then collapsed, one after another like puppets cut from strings. The silence that followed was deafening. Smoke curled from the servers. Rain still hammered the roof. Nora yanked the drive free, eyes wide, hands shaking. "It's done. We have everything. The program is down." Leaned against a rack, chest heaving. Cole lowered his rifle, his face pale in the glow of dying lights. Riley stood in the silence, her rifle smoking, her breath shallow. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't over. Because just then, a figure stepped into the smoke. General. No escort, no weapon raised, just his coat drenched from the rain, his eyes locked on Riley. The others froze. His voice carried steady, unshaken. "You think you've stopped it, but the machine doesn't live here. It lives in every man willing to trade conscience for control. You killed soldiers, you burned hardware, but the idea never dies." Riley's hands shook on the rifle. Her finger hovered on the trigger. But didn't move to fight. He just stood, the storm behind him, his words heavier than his presence. So tell me, Shade, what will you kill next? The men who follow, the ones who build, or yourself when you realize there's no end? The silence pressed in, tensed. Cole raised his rifle. Nora's tablet beeped faint warnings. But Riley lowered her weapon. Not out of mercy, out of clarity. Was right about one thing. The machine didn't end here, it never would. And Shade wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of becoming its mirror. She stepped forward, her voice steady, almost a whisper. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She turned her back to him, pulled Cole and Nora toward the exit. Alarms still wailed. The servers burned, and behind them didn't follow. He only watched, rain streaking his face like war paint as they vanished into the storm. Hours later at Air Force Base, the hangars echoed hollow. Riley walked alone, duffel brushing her leg, no insignia on her chest. She carried no flag, no name, only the weight of the ARC sigil burned into her hand. She reached an empty briefing table, set the rifle down flat, and stood in silence. Shade was back in play. Not for vengeance, not for victory, but because ghosts like her carried what others refused to face. No headlines, no medals, just the quiet sound of boots against concrete carrying her into the next storm. Because wars and shadows never end. And sometimes, the only way to fight the machine is to remain human.